All right, welcome to the final part of this lesson, the end of the Cold War. Just going into this a bit. Now, how does this come to an end? So, basically comes down to two leaders. This stuff you should have learned in U.S. history, but I'll be going over it a little bit again here, and probably going in more depth than you have had before. But Ronald Reagan of the United States in the 1980s and Mikhail Gorbachev, the leader of the Soviet Union, in the mid to late 1980s. He wasn't in the beginning of the 1980s, but he was to the mid to late 1980s, when the Soviet Union actually started to change a bit, and you could definitely argue for the better from a Western point of view. Um, but these are pictures. These are guys I grew up with, seeing all the time in the news, all the time in the news. It's just like every single day it was something about Reagan and Gorbachev and what was going on in the world, and how it seemed like tensions were getting worse or getting better on almost a day-to-day basis. The news was fickle when it came to that. It didn't really give you a sense of like where it was really going. So, anyways, now the two viewpoints. So on the left side, you see this whole idea of what Reagan, how he does things, and then Gorbachev on the right-hand side. I'm going to explain the Gorbachev side first. So from the previous lessons, I hope you're kind of getting the feeling the Soviet Union was quite oppressive and life was just not good there. I don't know if I didn't really focus that much on what life was really like there, but it wasn't that great. You just didn't have a lot of things. How do I put this? I'm trying to summarize this as best as possible. It's like going into the grocery store and seeing limitations on everything. Like you can only buy so much of this. You can only buy so much of this. Oh, wait a minute. We just saw that with COVID-19. So you guys have actually had a little bit of introduction to the way things worked in the Soviet Union, except for you had less of things. It's not like you can only take, you can only buy one jar of pickles, but at least you had, 3 or 20 different manufacturers of pickles that you could choose from. The Soviet Union, you just had one manufacturer of pickle, one version of pickles. There's only one car you can buy. There isn't Ford. There isn't Ford versus Chevy. There isn't Toyota versus Honda. There was just one car. That was it. It took forever to get one, by the way. I'm going way into this, but basically what I'm trying to explain is life in the standard of life in the Soviet Union compared to the standard of life in the United States was a heck of a lot worse. And by the way, in the 1970s and the early 1980s, life was not looking that great in the United States. We were having a tough time. You could say our standard of living was starting to go down a little bit. But it was still a heck of a lot better than the Soviet Union was. So Gorbachev recognized this. Unlike his predecessors, unlike guys like Brezhnev and Khrushchev, unlike his predecessors, he was someone who's like, you know what, I want this to work. I want it to work well. And you know what, we've proven that whoever's in charge doesn't really know what's best for everybody. So maybe we should open up and see what everybody else thinks. So he does something called, I say it at the bottom, called glasnost, where he says, hey, you know what, go ahead and criticize us. Criticize your government. You've always been put to death or put into some sort of gulag out in the middle of Siberia for criticizing the government before. But this time you can, and we won't come down on you for it. By the way, everybody in the Soviet Union was very hesitant to criticize the government because this was usually a trap in the beginning. Joseph Stalin did this where he invited criticism of the government and then he killed or jailed everybody that criticized him, basically getting rid of all opposition. And he wasn't the only one that did stuff like that. Brezhnev was known for doing stuff like that as well, just finding who his enemies were and getting rid of them by saying that he wanted to be criticized, that he was open to new ideas. But Gorbachev really was one of these guys. So look at Gorbachev. Yeah, he was on the other side, you could say, but you look at that and say, okay, he seems like the real deal. He seems like he has good intentions, essentially, to create a better world. So he does take the criticism and he doesn't put any down for it. And once some people criticize stuff and they don't disappear, then everybody starts criticizing. You get a lot of criticisms that come into the government go into it. And Gorbachev also launched what's called perestroika, this idea like, okay, we can restructure the economy and make it so it's better and maybe you can get a life like the United States has, through a lot of these criticisms. So basically, Gorbachev was trying to make the Soviet Union a better socialist state. The problem was a lot of these criticisms were leading the Soviet Union to more capitalistic, free market ideas to make life better. And you can't really have that to get a socialistic state working. That doesn't work ideally. Now, on the other side, you have Reagan, who bluntly calls the Soviet Union the evil empire. And this is definitely during the days of like Khrushchev and Brezhnev. These really just bad guys that were in charge of the Soviet Union that would just put down any opposition. And Reagan came out and just called that evil. And just said, this is us versus them. We're the good, they're the bad. Reagan also realized that the United States needed to show the world that their way of life, the capitalistic way of life, really provided a better life of liberty and high standard of living. Even though we were already doing that, we were starting to falter a bit, and Reagan did successfully turn that around. And it wasn't just him, of course. It was the efforts of a lot of different people, but he is given credit for that. He also does something, I'm going to refer back to this a little bit later, where he comes up with this idea of making us feel more safe with something called the Strategic Defensive Initiative, or SDI. Also known as the Star Wars program, because he comes up with this idea when Star Wars is the big thing. It always has been a big thing, but I mean, when it was right out, like 1984, yeah, everybody was Star Wars nuts back then. I was a Star Wars nut. I was 6 years old, and I was a big-time Star Wars nut. Although I did have nightmares of Return of the Jedi. My dad took me to that movie in the theaters, and I had some pretty bad nightmares of Darth Sidious from that point on. Anyways, so this is kind of the two viewpoints. Now, with Reagan's viewpoint and Gorbachev's viewpoint, I hope you're seeing why they did, when they see each other and what they're both trying to do, it's like, well, I guess we are trying to make the world a better place. And all of a sudden, between those two leaders, you see a lot of things happening. Like, for instance, the pictures here is just talking about nuclear disarmament. Like, okay, yeah, we've been building up nukes, but now let's talk about trying to de-escalate things, make the world a better place. This is what are called the SALT talks. I can't remember if I put that in your notes, but that's what the SALT talks are, is this idea of nuclear disarmament from both sides. Hey, we'll get rid of some nukes if you get rid of some nukes. Thing is that as they're doing this and you're having all of this stuff happen between Reagan and Gorbachev, and it seems like the world's going to be a better place, well, people are catching on to that. And within the Soviet Union, you have a lot of people that are thinking that now's our time. Now we can kind of throw off the shackles of Soviet dictatorship and kind of get our own control of our independent countries. It first starts in Poland with what's called the Solidarity Movement, where they're allowed, okay, in the Soviet Union you can only have one party, meaning political party, which means you can only vote communist, the Communist Party. Like, if you wanted to see something like that today, it's like it would just be like only the Democrats or only the Republicans, nobody else. That's it, and you can only vote for them. If that sounds not right to you, it isn't in a free country. That is not a free country if you don't at least have options or people that can run. And the Soviets made it illegal for any of the political parties to run. You can only run if you're a communist, and if they say that you can be part of it, you can run as a communist. Meaning that they picked and choose who were elected leaders. It's not true democracy, that's for sure. Solidarity Movement, though, was able to get it so where they're on the ticket and they get voted in by the people, thus ousting the communist government that's been there for decades. This was huge. By the way, the picture at the bottom is that's the first Polish president that wasn't necessarily a communist president. Then the same thing happens in Czechoslovakia, what's called the Velvet Revolution, where they just throw off the shackles of communist government and open up their borders. Then Hungary does it too. And all of a sudden, when these, especially Czechoslovakia and Hungary, when they kind of throw off the shackles of Soviet communism, and Gorbachev doesn't send in the tanks, all of a sudden Germany realizes, holy cow, we can do this too. You know, this is one of the coolest things ever to happen in my lifetime, most definitely, is the fall of the Berlin Wall. So I didn't mean to make that rhyme, but there you go. And the reason why this happened is that a lot of East Germans wanting a better life realized, I can just go down to Hungary, because I can go down there, that's part of the Soviet bloc, and then walk over to West Germany. I can walk over to the other side, to the West. I can walk over to the free countries, essentially. And so hundreds of thousands of people do this. And people are wondering, why do we have the Berlin Wall anymore? It's not keeping people from getting to the West. It used to, but it's not anymore. And just random, like, it's one of the craziest things. There was no, It's not like a flash mob. It's not like people are saying, hey, show up this day. Just all of a sudden, people just show up at the wall one day, realizing you don't need it, and they both start beating it down from both sides. And the guards stand down. They could have started shooting people, the East Side guards, I should say. And they don't. They just watch it happen. In fact, you see that in the top picture there. Those are East German guards, or any of the Soviet guards, just watching the wall come down. And then once that happens, they realize there's no repercussions, no one's going to get shot over this. They just go to town on this one. And they tear down every last remnant they can of this thing, and people that haven't seen each other for decades, if they're still alive, now see each other for the first time. It's just one of those cool, like I said, one of the greatest things to happen in my lifetime is the reunification of Germany, and just what that did for not just Germany, but for the entire world of just kind of coming together. So Germany is now reunified. This happens in the year 1989. I was 6th grade. That was one of the weirdest things ever to have happen. So Germany becomes one nation again, and that's Germany to this day. So, and then of course the domino effect hits the Soviet Union. Now, did you notice how I said domino effect hits the Soviet Union? In the previous lessons, I kept talking about the domino effect, and hopefully you've heard of the domino effect. From our point of view, we didn't want countries to go down and fall to we didn't want countries to fall to communism like a dominoes all going one by one. But that's exactly what happened to the Soviet Union. All their countries. Once Poland went down, then the domino of Hungary and Czechoslovakia went down. Then East Germany went down. And actually one of the last dominoes to fall was the Soviet Union itself. In 1991, so about a year and a half, 2 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, the Soviet Union has an economic collapse, and they actually ask for help from the United States. And they reform a new government that is not a communistic government, it's more of a democratic republic under the leadership of a guy named Boris Yeltsin. Now, there's a lot of things that happen there, and I shouldn't say shenanigans, but like they don't know how to be. The Russians are still learning how to be a free nation. Let's just say that to this day, they're still learning. And they might be, you could argue and say they're regressing at this point, but anyways, neither here nor there. I don't know enough on that one to say that, just things I kind of see in the news or read. Where was I? Oh, this map is showing you just all the different pieces of Soviet Union that break off. All those countries, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, Belarus, Moldova, Ukraine, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, and Kyrgyzstan, are all former states that were within the Soviet Union, but that now are their own independent states today. They gained their actual political freedom from the Soviets, from the Russians. And what's in red there is what Russia is today. So, anyways, that is the... Oh, I didn't explain why the Soviet Union fell, did I? If I didn't, what happened was they went bankrupt. They could not keep up with it. They couldn't keep their stores stocked well enough. They couldn't keep their standard of living up the way they were trying to. Essentially going in, I know it sounds weird to say for a socialist state, but so much massive debt and such a bad supply structure that they couldn't keep their people happy, I guess you could say. It's massive economic and social collapse there. And part of it was they spent way too much on military spending to keep up with our, I meant to talk about this earlier, the United States' SDI defense system, which, by the way, didn't exist. Reagan basically lied about that. And the Soviets are like, we need to get one too. So they tried to steal it from us, but they couldn't steal anything because it didn't really exist. Now, by the way, it does exist today during the presidencies of Bill Clinton, the latter part of his presidency, and the presidency of George W. Bush. We actually do have missile defense systems that are supposed to be able to shoot nukes out of the sky. But they didn't have that in the 1980s. And the Soviet Union basically bankrupted. One of the reasons they bankrupted themselves is because of that. But the main reason why they fell is they couldn't keep up with the standard of living of the United States. They couldn't keep up with the standard of living of France. They couldn't do it, or Great Britain. And just the realization came to them that, yeah, our way of life was able to provide a better way of life overall, even with its problems. So anyways, take that for what you'd like. There's the end of the Cold War for you. And I'll see you guys in the next unit, which will be on modern China.